Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. And today we have a very interesting topic for our viewers, and this is something that our friend Donald Trump has proposed. It's a 100% tariff on Brics. And a lot of commentators are saying, in case you don't know what Brics is, you got to find out. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, who purportedly want to undermine the US dollar and replace it with a different currency, their currency. So Donald has said, well, we're going to put 100% tariffs on that. The other problem with BRICS, they've expanded. They've added Nigeria, they've added Egypt, Iran, all your favorite friendly countries have joined BRICS. So we have a big support to undermine the US dollar. Recently, Elon Musk has also decided to eliminate US aid to all these countries and more. And US aid amounts to about, it's totally different than tariffs, but it's a giveaway program of $80 billion per year. So with that, we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker. You got to keep it separate. The aid elimination and tariffs are two different issues. But we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, to make sense of what's going on in Washington, D.C. So David, since you worked on the Hill and you know what goes on, what's going to happen with this 100% tariffs on BRICS? We'll start there before we go to the massive USA aid giveaway program.
Well, let's talk first, Nick, about Trump and tariffs, because there are things that are in the news today with regard to his position of tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China. Trump, in my opinion, uses tariffs as a negotiating strategy. He's willing to impose tariffs in circumstances where he believes there are unfair trading practices that harm the United States and U.S. workers, but he's also willing to use tariffs at a minimum as a negotiation strategy and potentially a penalty in situations where countries, in his view, are not doing what needs to be done to protect the interest of the United States. In the case of Mexico, we obviously have problems with the southern border. We have, fentanyl and human trafficking going on the southern border. In the case of Canada, we have concerns with regard to border security and fentanyl coming in over the northern border. In the case of China, China is, providing a lot of the materials that are used in order to be able to make the fentanyl. In the case of all three countries, we have a negative trade balance. We're running a trade deficit with them, if you will. So we're importing more than we're exporting to them. And because of those issues, Trump has proposed to impose a 25% tariff on Mexican goods, a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, with the exception of energy products, which would be 10%, and then a 10% tariff on China. But just within the last hour, there's been a delay in the proposed tariffs being imposed on Mexico because President Trump spoke with the president of Mexico, and Mexico is going to be sending 10,000 members of their National Guard to the border to try to provide better border security and stem the flow of fentanyl and human trafficking. There's supposed to be a call this afternoon with the Canadian Prime Minister, and there could end up being a delay with regard to there. I'm not sure what the situation is with regard to China. So that's the current situation. Now, with regard to BRICS, you've already articulated who the major members are of BRICS. You've also noted that they're concerned about the power of the United States and the West. They want to try to provide a counterbalance. They're also concerned about the dollar, and so therefore they've talked about the possibility of creating an alternative reserve currency that would be backed 40% by gold and 60% by a basket of other currencies. Obviously the United States doesn't like that because right now we have about 60% of the world's global reserves. And therefore, that gives us an advantage with regard to borrowing cost, with regard to trade, and also with regard to the ability to impose economic sanctions on rogue nations and others. So it's something that we obviously don't want to have undercut. At the same point in time, 100% tariffs on Brics nations. Again, you're talking about Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now other countries, is frankly totally unrealistic. And the real concern that I have is, don't blame them because we're not putting our finances in order. They're not the problem. We're the problem. The problem is that we've lost control of our nation's finances. Our debt as a percentage of GDP is too high. It's projected to get a lot higher. The fastest growing expense in the budget is interest costs, for which we get nothing. And so what we need to do is that we need to get our own house in order rather than blaming other people for our problems. So I personally, I don't have a lot of patience on blaming other people for our financial challenges, and I think using tariffs in appropriate circumstances makes sense, but 100% tariffs on BRIC nations because they want to have an alternative currency, I think, is a non-starter and not credible on its face.
Okay, well, we'll have to see what our panel has to say from around the world. We're going to bring in our friend from Canada, Sasha Starr, assuming Canadians are still our friends. We're not really sure about that, since the Paris.
Let me mention, Nick, if I can, that, sure. Personally, Sasha, I think that Canada ought to be at least 2 states.
Okay, right. So we're going to concede that Canada could be 2
although
states.
Believe it or not, California has almost double the GDP of Canada, and Texas has a bigger GDP than Canada.
Right, but Canada has their own position when it comes to these tariffs. So we'll get to listen to see what Sasha, as our representative from Canada, has to say about these tariffs.
First of all, David, according to your logic, that Canada, with almost 40 million people population, should be split in 2 or 3 or acquired by the United States. Think about that. Most European countries, with exception of France, Germany, UK, perhaps Italy, they are all less than population of Canada. So would that be also prudent to speak about U.S. acquiring them? See, there is a danger is that tariffs is not just a mathematical exercise. So you will put 25 tariffs there and 10 there, and then you will reverse it back and back. It's also the deterioration of relationships. Right. And the country with $36 trillion worth of debt should be a little bit more mindful about international relationship. Because if you imagine that what I've heard yesterday on Fareed Zakaria's problem is that China is not worried about this 10% at all, because they're now making bridges to not only BRIC countries, but also European Union countries, such as Denmark, which is under threat of U.S. taking over the Greenland. So, of course, they will approach Canada and Mexico for sure, too. Canada already, from tomorrow, there will be 100% tariff on all Tesla cars. The U.S. banks and financial institutions are ordered to get out of Canada instantly and 100% without no exception. So the damage is already being done. It's not that at 3 o'clock Trump will, okay, what he needs now, he must reverse this tariffs thing with Canada, but he needs a good excuse. He needs to save face. He cannot say, sorry, I was wrong. Okay, the tariffs are out. cannot do, and he's not going to do that. So he needs Trudeau to make some concessions, similar to what the Mexican president did. Maybe Canada will send some army on the border, or maybe Canada will do something else. I don't know, whatever it is. And so he will reverse. But damage has been already enormous. There is a hatred from Canadians toward United States as a state, as its people, as its government, as everything. If you take, I have many friends in Florida, Canadians, they're all selling their condos and houses, whatever they have. They run away. Some of them are leaving keys. They refuse to continue the payments, their mortgages or maintenance fees or taxes or whatever. They just get out of there. And this is exactly the damage what cannot be reversed. Even if you remove tariffs, it's not going to be reversed. The Canadians booze at United States anthem on basketball and hockey games. It's a really hostility. There is a boycott of all U.S. products started on Saturday. They remove all U.S. Liquor products today, but on Saturdays there was no sale of any U.S. bourbons or any other alcoholic.
Red state liquor is what they call it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, red state liquor, right.
Yeah.
So it seems to me the Canadians are a little bit upset.
Let me react.
Yeah.
First, Sasha, I was kidding when I said about two states. Canada is an independent nation. It's going to stay an independent nation. And I was kidding about that. Secondly, I agree with you that tariffs do have consequences with regard to relationships. There's no question about that. Thirdly, I don't think all Americans would be favorable towards what's going on now, nor do I think that all Canadians, are of one mind with regard to what they think about the United States. We are close allies. We are major trading partners. We share many things in common. I do believe that this will be worked out. I do believe that both our president and your prime minister, who's on the outs, by the way, as you know, will probably work something out, because I don't think that it makes sense for us to have an escalating trade war. As I said, I think, Trump has a tendency to want to use tariffs in much greater frequency in situations than typically would be the case. Typically, they're used when there's a feeling that there's an unfair trading practice. Okay. Just because you have a negative balance of payments doesn't necessarily mean there's an unfair trading practice. Okay. And so, I'm hopeful that this will be worked out. I mean, obviously the markets don't like what's going on right now, with regard to this talk. And as I said before, Mexico, there's already been a tentative agreement with Mexico to where the tariffs are going to be delayed because they're taking certain steps. And I hope the same thing happens with Canada this afternoon. China, frankly, I don't think China is too concerned about a 10% tariff. But I come back to what I said. We got our own problems that we need to start solving. Okay. And we can't keep on blaming other people for our problems. That's my view.
And we're going to move to Asia and bring in Dr. Sharif, who's in Bangladesh. And China's being hit, looks like, with a 10% tariff. So, Dr. Sharif, maybe you have some thoughts on what's going on, or what do the people in Asia think about this tariff war that looks like it's stemming?
Yeah, thank you. This is very interesting discussions, and I want to give thanks to give me these opportunities, especially when we discuss about BRICS, the BRICS nations actually based in Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Definitely a country like Bangladesh, we are a very good ally of India and China, and we have a very good close contact with definitely with India, China, also in USA. And if we focus on this in economic impact, we can find that high consumer price is a will be major challenge right now, especially if we focus on the country. We find many good, especially from China and India. And if we see this electronic, pharmaceuticals, and textile industry from this particular region, and would become more expensive for this particular issues. Inflation pressure always we have. Example, right now Bangladesh has more than 10% inflations, but there is a chance that it will increase. So increased cost for imported goods could lead to inflations. Even we have a very good, strong relationship with USA. Example, just USA shut down this US aid activities with Bangladesh. And I know ICTDRB. I know many of my friends work in ICTDRB. They are in the research industries, and thousands of people they lose their job because US aid shut down. Supply chain is a major issues because country like Bangladesh is not part of BRICS 100%, but India, China, all of them have a strong relationship with India. So industry rely on BRICS imports. So automotive, tech industries could suffer of shortage. Domestic production boost. This is also a good point. I just want to say that right now I'm observing from South Asia, even in India or China or Bangladesh or Pakistan, everybody trying to develop their production, domestic production. Some local industries might benefit as consumer look for domestic alternative. Export relations, BRICS countries may impose counter tariff that will be a problem for us and harming business that export to them. But from my point of view, honestly speaking, I just want to focus on the new geopolitical issues. And if we see that in USA actually taking a lot of initiatives against immigrant, against this trade, and in a short period of time. Uh, and honestly speaking, how I see this those initiative, even I see that Elon Musk, he trying to strengthen the right wing in the global politics. Even in the Germany, he attended in the conference, and he is trying to strengthen the right wing in Germany. So that is the, I do not know because we have David Walker. You are expert on these things, but that is the immaturity. Honestly speaking, I am observing from outside that how USA trying to impose all of the right wing, all of the trade and war, all of the immigration things in a short period of time, and I'm afraid uh, this is another trade war. This is another problem we are welcoming. But USA can do a lot of things, and I know that USA has very good thinkers like David Walker, Nick Palveda, and many more good people. USA has US economy actually, and USA intellectual community is very big. So you have lot to do. You can contribute in many ways. But how I observing from outside, this is challenging situation for everyone.
Yeah, let me mention, if I can, Nick, we had an election in November. In that election, Donald Trump, rightly or wrongly, won both the Electoral College, which is how our elections are resolved at the presidential level. He also won in the popular vote, which was surprising to many. And there were several issues that are clearly identified as being the primary reasons that he won. One was the economy, and in particular, inflation. Secondly, the border security or lack thereof, and the implications with regard to crime, human trafficking, drug trafficking, if you will. Thirdly, international stability. We didn't have, there's a lot of international instability, which people are concerned about, if you will. And so he's taken a number of steps, aggressive steps, no question, to try to address those three issues early on. In some cases through executive orders, which do not represent law, they represent policy. One of the things that you're talking about with regard to USAID is, Congress appropriates the funding, and the executive branch has to administer that funding. If Congress provides a law that says that they're providing appropriations of X amount for Y country, then the president doesn't have the authority to not do that. He can seek to impound the funds for various reasons, but then Congress has Congress has a certain number of days to act, and if they don't act, then the funds aren't impounded, and the president has to follow the law. In other circumstances, the Congress appropriates a certain amount of money, but doesn't tie it to a particular country. And in that circumstance, the president has the authority to decide how that money is going to be spent. And presumably that's what's going on now. It's funding that has not been earmarked for a particular country, if you will. So he's trying to do, rightly or wrongly, everything he can with his executive authority. But there's a lot of things that he can't do unilaterally with his executive authority, and they'll have to have the Congress to be able to work with him to get things done. And in some cases, we may have to have a constitutional amendment. Like, for example, if you want a line item veto, that takes a constitutional amendment. If he wants greater impoundment authority, that's not a constitutional amendment, but it will take a change in the law. And frankly, I think it ought to be changed, because the way that it is right now is, I think, not very effective. That's part of what's going on. I think the other thing that we have to understand is, how do these tariffs, if they are imposed, how will they affect consumers in the United States? Because that's what he's concerned about. He's concerned about they can result in excess inflation. They don't automatically result in excess inflation, because let me kind of walk you through it and we can talk about it. It depends upon what goods and services you're talking about. Let's say, for example, that there's a 10% tariff that's imposed on certain goods from China. Then the question is, are there alternative sources for those goods? So therefore, you don't have to buy the Chinese goods. All right. Secondly, is the company that is providing those goods, are they going to absorb some of the tariff? Or are they going to pass it all on to the consumer, to where the consumer would end up having to pay 100% of the difference? They may decide to absorb some of that for a period of time through their profit margin, because they're hoping that it's going to be temporary. So it's a lot more complicated issue than people want to make it out to be. But I can say this: what we don't want to do is to go back to the trade wars of the early 20th century, which resulted in a serious global depression. That's something that we clearly don't want, nor do I believe will be allowed to happen.
Yeah, and it looks like we're just going to be buying more goods from Bangladesh. But in the meantime, we're going to listen to the Americans. We're bringing in Kim Calhoun, who's in the Miami area today. The voice of progressive, of course, Jacoby McDuffie. And then from the High IQ Society, we have Rick Rosner, who already has his hands up, either questions or comments.
So my wife went crazy last night. She's not political, but when she starts paying attention to politics, she gets nervous as hell, and about all this stuff that Musk and Trump are doing. And there was an editorial in the New York Times yesterday that said, don't believe it, that Trump has been flooding the zone with 100 executive orders, doing this, doing that. Most of this stuff is not going to happen. It's not legally allowed, as you've been saying. Already the Mexico tariff that had everybody pooping their pants, that's been delayed for a month. The Canada tariff may get knocked back. So this editorial in the New York Times said, by believing that Trump can do everything he says he can do, you're giving him the power to do it. And just be skeptical, and don't run around with your hair on fire yet.
As I said, Rick, buckle your seatbelt and buy your popcorn. But right, I mean, I think not everything's going to happen that he wants to do. And as I said before, he uses tariffs as a leverage, as a negotiation tool, as a leverage to try to get other things done. It's not in his interest, nor is it in the nation's interest to create severe adverse relationships with other countries, or to fuel a trade war that would end up having serious adverse, inflationary and economic consequences, not just for us, but for others.
Just yes, he's flooding the zone. The problem with the tariffs is what Sasha expressed already, is that even though you're threatening and so on and so forth, that phrase and causes issues with relationships. For example, Sasha expressed how there are Canadians already booing at games, booing the U.S. national anthem. You already have individual Canadians that I even personally know of that said that even when they're coming on vacation, they're not going to spend $1 in the U.S. because of that. So it's fraying relationships. The tariffs are a bad issue, especially the way that he's using them. The U.S.-Mexico one, the U.S. made concessions as well. The U.S. is actually going to be attempting to stem the flow of high-powered weapons into Mexico, just as they're changing their methods with Cuba because they gave concessions there as well. What concessions they're going to give to Canada, it won't get announced, but we'll have to listen to whatever comes out of Canada to actually find out what's going on. There's also other problems. I mean, again, going with Doge is now a government institution, and now Doge or Elon Musk is having his individuals take over the checkbook of the U.S., where he's saying that he's going to, as he said, stop the U.S. aid, but that's a problem. So Doge, the individual in the financial market who was handling the, I forget his name, starts with an L, who was handling that checkbook, is now left and resigned because of the pressures that were put on by Elon Musk and his team to take over that finance. He should not have any inkling or any control over that, but he now does, and that is a problem. So I guess bringing it back to where my worries and my concerns are, again, when I stress that we have that he is our first oligarch, that is exactly what this is now. He's controlling the checkbook and has not been vetted. He has not been checked or anything. And he has special interests. With the firing of the FAA stuff, that was him because he hated having to deal with his stuff with SpaceX. So we have a problem, and I just don't understand how we take it so lightly.
Well, let me come back here and then go to Rick. Okay. First, let's talk about what Doge is and what it isn't. Okay. And then what they can do and what they can't do, because there's a lot of confusion about this. Originally, Doge was going to be an external advisory group. It was going to be outside of the government. And originally, it was going to have a very broad charter dealing with the organization operations of the federal government. However, now what's turned out to be is Doge is now within the White House complex. It is inside of government, okay? It's taken over the digital service that used to be part of the White House, okay? And its mission has allegedly been narrowed to focus on information systems and information technology issues, okay? Doge is not in line management. They have the authority to be able to gain access to information. For example, the payment system that you're talking about, what they wanted was access to the system to be able to look at transactions and find out what's going on. They do not have the authority to instruct anybody to do anything, okay? What has to happen is if they see something that they don't like, other than talking about it in the media, they have to deal with the appropriate parties within the government who have the authority to be able to make those decisions. For example, in Treasury, the confirmed Secretary of the Treasury made the decision to give the Doge people access to that database. Okay, and with regard to the issue of USAID, You know, they can make recommendations, but they don't have the authority to decide, you know, what's going to get paid and what's not going to get paid. You know, they need to be more transparent. There need to be more checks and balances here, in my view. Okay. And it's still kind of playing out. Rick, what do you have?
Well, both Musk and Trump are slippery fellas. They have, their lubricant is bullshit. Trump has been able to get by for 50 years to skate over a bunch of failures by bullshitting and lawyering his way out of it. And it makes it hard to get an angle on these guys because they say stuff that, like, some of it sounds genius, some of it sounds completely idiotic. Trump with the tariffs is like, you know, like that seems terrible, and then he gets at, you know, he uses them as a threat, and it somehow works, and so now it looks like four-dimensional chess, and we just don't have a good handle on people who are kind of psychopaths with a ton of power.
Jacoby?
So the problem again with Doge, it was stated and agreed it was external, but then it now becomes internal and nobody says anything. Everybody says, okay, well, it should be internal. Now it's stated that, oh, well, they're just going to deal with computer systems and that's it. Oh, nobody says anything. But now Elon Musk, has already shut down aid. As Dr. Sharif had pointed out, the US aid being shut down. So when we keep allowing, and this is why I said at the very beginning, Doge is unvetted. Elon Musk is unvetted. His staff is unvetted. They have personal business interests in where the money goes because Elon Musk is tied in. And him being unvetted, having personal business interests, all that is a problem. But again, we go back to, well, he just has, we can't, I just don't understand why we nonchalantly treat it as it's not a big thing.
Well, let me come back and mention a couple of things, and we'll go to Rick. All right.
Oh.
First, let me tell you why I think Doge. This is my opinion. I don't know this for a fact. Okay. My opinion as to why Doge is now on the inside rather than the outside. Okay. The first day that Trump was sworn in, there were at least 3 suits that were filed against Doge. All right. And I think one of the reasons that they brought Doge on the inside was to undercut those suits, because those suits will basically be moot because they assumed that Doge was going to be outside of government. And therefore, that was their big argument, and that's undercut. Secondly, by putting Doge as an arm of the White House, which is what they are, they're not subject to FOIA. So they're not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. However, they are subject to GAO review. And I know that firsthand because I ended up having to do a review of the National Energy Policy Development Group when I was Comptroller General, and they tried to resist our ability to do that review, and I ended up having to sue the Vice President, and there's a long story there. So they're not going to be subject to FOIA. They are going to be subject to GAO review, and I'm sure there will be GAO reviews. They will be now subject to and the reason I say that, Jacoby, is because GAO has a long-standing policy that they don't just do work for the majority, they also do work for the minority. So if the minority, if a ranking member of a relevant committee of jurisdiction asks the GAO to do work on an area that's within their jurisdiction, they have to do the work. It's not discretionary, it's mandatory. And so by being inside a government, they'll be subject to more ethics rules. They'll be subject to more conflict of interest rules. But as I said before, there needs to be a lot more transparency about this than there's been, because in the absence of that transparency, you the issues come up that may or may not be valid, but nonetheless, we don't know whether they are or they're not because there's not enough transparency.
So there's a political analyst named Heather Cox Richardson. You should maybe follow her on Instagram, who talks about the ambiguity and how it shields Doge and Musk and Trump from lawsuits and from, if you say one thing and then you say another thing and then you contradict, if you're constantly throwing up contradicting yourself and throwing up a bunch of bullshit, people can't sue you or can't move against you because it's not clear that you're doing what you're doing. And so this appears to be, to some extent, an intentional strategy to stop people from moving against some of the stuff they're doing.
And honestly, Dave, the reason I shook my head and saying that it won't be looked into even by GAO, one, Trump fired a bunch of inspector generals to protect himself. Also, the 4 lawsuits that were brought up against Doge were all asking for transparency. So to move it from away from the lawsuits of transparency to a place where they can't be attacked on those lawsuits, and then actually, because everybody that Trump is putting out of office and everybody's he's putting in, because the argument that this is going to be submitted to ethics, that's not carrying any weight based on Trump himself. Trump himself has so many ethic issues that are tied up against him. Pete Hegseth, who is now the DOD head, has so many ethics issues against him. RFK Jr., all these individuals would fail if we actually held them to the ethics standards that we act as if we have. So saying those things, that's why I have no belief or faith that the GAO will hold Trump's right-hand man, who paid roughly $300 million to get him in office, to any ethical standard, especially because he hasn't even been vetted. They're not even looking into his business connections. They're not looking into any of the business connections that are connected to Doge. So it's basically a protected entity now by the government because Trump is running that government and wants to do what he wants to do.
All right, let me suggest this. All right, first, when it was outside of the government, it's not subject to the government ethics rules, which is one of the reasons why there was the suit. Okay, now that it's inside the government, it is subject to the government's ethics rules. And the other thing that Elon's going to have to deal with, if he doesn't want to have as many restrictions on his investments and things of that nature, then if he wants to be a special government employee, I'm one. Okay, I'm unpaid. I'm on the Defense Department's Defense Business Board, but I'm subject to certain transparency requirements and certain conflict requirements. But I'm also subject to not working more than so many days a year if I want to maintain the status. And he's going to have the same thing. I don't know how he's going to deal with that. But understand this. The other thing is GAO is in the legislative branch. The president can't tell GAO to do anything. The IGs, the firing of the 17 IGs was inappropriate and illegal. And I've said that publicly. All right. It's one thing to be able to make a decision to dismiss an IG for cause with providing advance notice, 30 days advance notice to the Congress. It's another thing to dismiss 17 IGs without providing notice to the Congress and without providing cause. All right. So we'll see what, if anything, the Congress does. In fact, I've got a draft op-ed, which has been accepted for publication by inside sources, that talks about Doge, the firing of the IGs, and the GAO, that I expect will be published within the next few days, and I'll post it to my social media sites. Kim.
Yeah, kind of want to go back to some of the other things that we were discussing, like his negotiations with Mexico and Canada and China. And China has, stated that they're prepared for this, that they are going to devalue their currency to manage the situation, which they're a country who could probably afford to do that. There are probably several other companies that are going to take that position. And, it's like Nick said, well, good for America, but it's not in many, many ways, because now you've created not just a currency war, but a trade war. On top of this tariff war, how far will it go, and how damaging can it be if other countries follow suit and devalue their currency, say to 2.5%, which is what they claim they're prepared to do?
Time will tell. I mean, I don't think this is going to be something that's going to be broad based. I think it's going to be targeted. I don't see there being an effort by the administration to try to impose tariffs on the entire European Union, for example. Okay, some people speculate that, but there's been no credible discussion about that I've heard of. As I said, I think 10% to China is no big deal. All right, I mean, I don't think that's a big deal. And by the way, a lot of the things that we import from China, the profit margins are huge. So I wouldn't be surprised if the sellers here in the United States absorbed some of that cost as part of their profit margin. Okay, but part of the whole reason that Trump is doing this is he wants to try to encourage and promote domestic production and reduce reliance on imports, and to try to start doing something about the trade imbalance, the huge balance of payments deficits that we have with many of these countries, in particular China. But again, that's not necessarily all their fault. We sent everything over there, okay?
Right, exactly.
Right, because we were concerned. We made cost the number one factor, right? We want as low a cost as we can. And so therefore, a lot of manufacturing went overseas, a lot of sourcing went overseas, where labor costs are a lot less, as well as labor protections. Environmental rules are a lot less. So as a result, we're now experiencing the impact of that. We don't have as much domestic production capacity. All right, we've become too reliant on others. And now there's going to have to be some short-term pain if we're going to end up reaping some long-term gain. And we're in a transition period right now, but it's in nobody's interest for it to spin out of control, and I don't think it will. Yeah.
I agree with you that our situation is our fault. And until we start addressing it, we're never going to fix it. We're going to be spinning the wheel and going right back to where we started, because until you learn from what happened and you fix the problem, it's not going to be fixed. But the other thing you mentioned, and I think that what he is trying to do is control the drugs coming in from Mexico and probably people sneaking over the border, so more legal law enforcement on the border. But that's not how you're going to control the drug usage in this country, because any businessman would know it's supply and demand. And as long as you have a demand, there's always going to be a supply. So we're not really fixing the problem. So I hope his next step isn't just to stop the supply, but fix the problem. Like he said, we're the problem, fix the demand. We need to focus on that.
Yeah, we are part of the problem. We're not the whole problem. For example, let's take the drug cartels. The drug cartels have now been designated as terrorist organizations, all right? Which I totally support, okay? Which means that a lot tougher actions can be taken against financial institutions or others that deal with them. But I'll tell you what else it may mean. And I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I think it's within the realm of possibility that it could. At some point in time, there could be a demand for Mexico to be much more aggressive against the drug cartels. And if they don't, we reserve the right to do it ourselves through the seals.
Well, we just saw that with one of his recent brag moments where apparently they killed some of ISIS in
ISIS.
the caves, or
Yeah, ISIS. Yeah, they went after. They
but
went.
ISIS, but where they and so this gives if you call someone terrorist, I guess, or announce that they're terrorists, it gives you right to attack them with any means necessary, is what I'm gathering, right?
Well, the problem is, I mean, obviously, it's much better than Mexico take care of the problem. The problem is there's so much corruption. I mean, they basically control wide territorial parts of Mexico. The drug cartels do. I mean, they've got so much money and so much influence, if you will. You know, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I'm saying it was a conditioned precedent to make them a terrorist organization, to deem them a terrorist organization, in order to even be able to consider that. All right.
Right.
There are other things that you can and we are doing, you know, with regard to financial institutions and things of that nature that are being done now. But I'm just saying, if that, you know, if Mexico doesn't cooperate enough, if the other steps that are being taken are ineffective, and if the problem continues to exist and get worse, that's a possibility. We'll see.
Well, yeah, like you said, it's going to be a roller coaster.
Jacoby, you were muted. Okay.
I will say I'm fearful of trying to designate drug cartels as terrorist organizations to give us authority to go in. As you said, it may not happen, but that becomes one of those slippery slopes because there are drug cartels in the U.S. Are they now going to be considered terrorist organizations as well? Mob groups, which are still there in the U.S. especially, are they going to be designated as terrorist organizations because they work out of other areas and other countries? So it's just it's a tough battle.
A lot of the Jacoby, a lot of the drug operations in the United States are connected with the cartels. Not all of them, but a lot of them are connected with the cartels. And presumably, if they are connected with the cartels, then they get the same designation. You know.
Well, what about the cartels in China? Because you also have those that are bringing over drugs from there. I mean, that's what I'm saying. You have
I understand.
You have the cartels in the
Where
U.S.
you
that are
draw
building.
the line is what you're saying, and I understand that. Yeah.
So it's just one of those that it's that
Slippery
broad
slope,
reach.
you said.
Yes. Yeah.
Fasten your seatbelt.
It is. Whoa.
Well, one thing I found out is that, remember Donald Trump was saying, we're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. Now with the tariffs, we now know how Mexico's going to pay for it.
They're not going to
25%.
pay for it in tariffs.
If they get imposed, my gut feeling is they're not going to get imposed. They're going to work it out.
Oh, okay. So maybe
Right now,
Well, look, we'll see, but I think it's going to get worked out.
yeah.
And I'm hopeful that Canada's going to get worked out. And I don't think China's worried about a 10% tariff. And
No, I don't think they're not worried about 10%. They don't want 100%, but they're not worried about 10%.
Yeah.
Well, there's another thing that may go on with this whole tariff wars. When somebody wants to import to the United States, they actually sell all their goods to, there's our friend Sharif. So China will sell all their goods to Sharif in Bangladesh at cost they would sell the U.S. And then Sharif will turn around and sell it to the United States, and then you're buying from Bangladesh, you're not buying from China. So China doesn't have to pay the tariffs.
That's part of what's going on now through Mexico, China to Mexico and here, which they're trying to crack down on. Sasha has had his hand up, I believe. Sasha?
Yeah, what I wanted to mention, I think I mentioned it before, that regardless whether the situation will cool down later on today between United States and Canada, the damage has been already done, and very substantial one. It's not something that you can easily fix in a day or even in a week or even a month, because now Canadian people, and I'm quite amazed that American people feel so united against this the tariffs thing that on Saturday, even before the tariffs were announced, or about the same time as they stopped buying all American-produced goods. Now, do you think that at 3 o'clock there will be a meeting and they will iron down all these details? So at 4 o'clock, somebody will say, Canadians, come on, let's go buy all American stuff. It's done. It's over. It's not going to happen.
By the way, Sasha, do you have any Red State liquor back there on that cabinet? Come on, you don't have to answer that.
No, I have vodka, tequila.
I was going to say, if you didn't have vodka, I would be shocked. Shocked.
And several kinds.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about going around the corner and getting some Chipotle, but I think that's one of those that has a tariff on them now and everything along those lines because that is a Mexican-owned company.
Everything's delayed a month, so go out and stock up, buddy.
Stack up on my Chipotle because it's literally around the corner and everything like that. So I got a month to go around the corner. But I did have a quick question for you and everything because the other thing that he's been talking about is DEI, and we know that he has a interesting belief on women leaders and everything. So I'm wondering, is he going to have to back up off of that to some degree? Because right now, the women that he is negotiating with is quite a few. It is the Mexican leader. She is a woman and everything. And I guess they had a call earlier today. I know the Honduras woman that said that she would not put up with tariffs and everything along those lines. So maybe he's going to have to back off of his alleged sexism and everything along those lines, because there are some very prominent women that he's going to have to negotiate with and everything. So I just wanted your take on that, because I can only imagine what that call was like with the Canadian woman, because not the Mexican woman, because apparently she doesn't put up with a lot of BS.
Well, let's put it this way. She did enough to where there's been a 1 month delay on imposing the tariffs. I mean, so she did something. We haven't seen that yet with regard to Canada. Look, I mean, Trump, from my perspective, and again, I don't know him well. I've met him, but that's it. Okay, he appointed the first female chief of staff for the White House. There's never been one before. The Attorney General of the United States is a female. The Secretary of Education is going to be a female. The ambassador to the UN is a female. I mean, I could go on. Okay, I don't think he has a big female problem, and I think part of the issue is how does DEI get implemented versus what the intent is. When I was at the GAO, I created something called the Office of Opportunity and Inclusiveness. Mm-hmm. That office was to try to take affirmative steps to help us to achieve a more pluralistic workforce. But it was all merit-based, and there were zero quotas. And we tried to hire qualified people while seeking to try to achieve diversity. But on the other hand, we would hire qualified people as we needed qualified people, even though they may not be exactly what we would ideally like to see with regard to our mix. I also had something called the Employee Advisory Council, and at that time, gay and lesbian, rights were a bigger issue, and they came to me and they said, "Can we have a seat on the Employee Advisory Council?" And I said, "Yeah, we'll give you a seat on the Employee Advisory Council to be able to give you a voice for a segment of the population that was gaining more visibility and credibility." And so I think there are steps that you can take to try to achieve a more diverse and inclusive workforce. But merit's got to be number one. You can't compromise merit.
Just to speak on that, the problem talking about DEI the way that it has been is people are saying merit hasn't been. Merit has been always. Because when you say that, it should be merit based and that was a DEI hire, that individual wasn't hired because of the color of their skin, if they were female, or so on and so forth. They took the same qualifications and just applied it to that person, no different than anybody else. And we also have to get rid of the idea that everything is merit-based. We have to get back to merit-based. The quote-unquote merit-based, for example, in the Trump's first time in office, his son-in-law was there. That wasn't merit-based. That was a DEI hire. His daughter was there. That's a DEI hire. The head of the Republican Party right now is a DEI hire. That was his daughter-in-law. You have Pete Hegseth is not the best person for the DOD. He was a DEI hire. Pam Bondi, who is now AG, was an individual that took money for her campaign down in Florida that she then defended and threw out a case against Donald Trump. Pam Bondi was a DEI hire, but she wasn't even going to be there because it was Matt Gaetz who was actually going to be the individual for AG, but he couldn't keep his hands away from minors.
Yeah.
So we have to stop the merit-based fallacy.
Hold on, two things. No matter what you think of them, okay, Donald Trump's son-in-law and Pete Hegseth get 0 points for DEI. 0 points for DEI because they're a Caucasian, male, straight. 0 points. I get 0 points. All right. I can assure you that DEI was real in the last administration. Okay. Here's where it can be a problem. Where it can be a problem is where you need to hire people and you don't end up hiring some people who are qualified because you're trying to achieve a certain targeted mix within the workforce, all right? And therefore, you don't end up hiring some qualified people because you'd rather hire people who are qualified, all right? You only want to hire qualified people, but you don't have enough candidates, in whatever segment of the population you're trying to hire for, and therefore you delay hiring. That's where it can be a problem, okay? So I think it's totally inappropriate to say that people are hired just because of their race, just because of their gender, just because of their ethnicity. I mean, I think that's not right. But the number one thing you have to do is you got to have enough qualified people while at the same point in time trying to work to achieve a diverse and inclusive workforce and non-discriminatory workforce.
And with that, we're at the hour, so we're going to have to go. Thank the Honorable David M. Walker, former Comptroller General of the United States, and our audience and our viewers from around the world. We'll see you next week on Economics, the Honorable David M. Walker.
Take care. All the best.